Hi friends, today I'm reading a book about a woman I had never heard about before I got this book. Her name was Effa Manley. It's called She Loved Baseball, the Effa Manley story. Now she is the only woman ever to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is pretty interesting. And it's even more interesting because she was African American and she did a bunch of cool things before that was sometimes not possible because of the way people thought. So let's see what happens in this story. The author's name is Audrey Vernick and the illustrator is Tate. So this is a true story. It's a biography. Remember, a biography is a book about somebody's life. I'm not a sports fan, but I know some of you are, and I thought you might enjoy. We've been reading about artists. We've been reading about people who worked in the Underground Railroad and people who worked in civil rights, but we haven't talked about anybody in sports, so I thought we'd talk about baseball a little bit. And here she is. When she was in first grade, Effa Brooks was called to the principal's office. "Young lady," the principal said, her voice hard and mean, "why must she play with those Negroes in the schoolyard?" Those Negroes were Effa's brothers and sisters. While Effa's skin was light, like her mother's, her siblings were dark, like their father. People with dark skin couldn't eat in certain restaurants or swim in public pools. Now it seemed they couldn't play with their sister either. That's just the way things are, people said, but it never made sense to Etta. So she's African American, but she had light skin, and it's interesting. People thought African Americans with lighter skin were better than African Americans with darker skin, which is just another form of, it's just really kind of crazy, right? As Effa grew up in Philadelphia in the early 1900s, America grew up too. Bold new music, jazz, blared, and folks stepped out in strange new shoes called sneakers. After high school, Effa moved to New York City, which seemed like the perfect place to live the big life she'd always dreamed of. Everyone was talking about Babe Ruth, the Yankees' new slugging sensation. Effa went to the games just to see his mighty swing. Nothing prepared her for the crackling energy of the 1932 World Series at Yankee Stadium, New York. New York was beating the Chicago Cubs, and the crowd roared its approval. With its swirl of excitement, Effa met a kind, fun-loving man, Abe Manley. Abe adored baseball. Uh-oh. Sorry, my cat is rubbing on the computer and moving it. Go on, honey. He soon adored Effa, too. He would take Effa out of town to Harlem, a bustling black neighborhood in New York City. But something in Harlem really bothered Effa. Even in black communities, most businesses were owned by white people, and black people were not hired for most jobs. That's just the way things are, people said, but Effa knew it wasn't. So Harlem is a neighborhood in New York City that used to be predominantly African American. And just to make sure you got this part, it's a neighborhood where African Americans live, but white people owned the businesses and then they wouldn't hire African Americans. So it really didn't make any sense, and it really wasn't helping African Americans get ahead in their lives. She organized the Citizens League for Fair Play, a group of community leaders. They urged Harlem's largest department store to hire a black sales clerk. The owner said no. Nobody believed a group of black people could change a white businessman's mind, but the league fought anyway. For weeks, they marched in the street carrying signs that said, "Don't buy where you can't work." So, that makes a lot of sense, right? You're not allowed to work there, so why should you spend your money there? And so here they are doing their demonstration. They convinced their neighbors to shop elsewhere. The store lost money, but still no black sales clerks. The league kept marching. Finally, they won. Newspapers reported the boycott's success. Effa proudly placed the articles in her scrapbook. Before long, hundreds of black people were working in stores throughout Harlem. So can you think of another boycott that was similar that worked like this? If you're thinking about Rosa Parks on the bus, how they had the bus boycott, that's very similar. Very similar because they stood up for what they believed in and they didn't back down. And in the bus boycott, they stopped riding the buses, and eventually they broke the system and they stopped having to sit in the back of the bus. And in this one, They finally got people working in the stores, which was great for the African American families because they were making more money, and then they started shopping there again. The world of baseball was headed for a change too. Abe and Effa married in 1935 and started a team, the Brooklyn Eagles, in the new Negro National League that Abe had helped establish. So not only that, so African Americans had to have their own league of baseball, which is kind of strange that they couldn't all play together, correct? I mean, that's what I think anyway, but at least they had a place to play. And so her husband helped start this league. Abe took the team south for spring training, but there was so much to do in Brooklyn, organizing schedules, ordering equipment, arranging transportation. Effa had never done work like this before, but the more she did it, the more she enjoyed it. By the time the Eagles moved to New Jersey in 1936, Effa was handling almost all the team's business. The city of Newark welcomed the Eagles. There was nothing more thrilling than a ball game at Rupert Field. The hot, sweet, and salty summer smells, the crack of the bat, people in their finest clothing, standing a few at first, willing the ball to keep going, then everyone at once, the thunderous cheers, the roar echoing blocks away. When first baseman Mule Suttles came to bat, the crowd chanted, "Kick Mule!" hoping to see his high-stepping home run swing. Monty Irvin had one of the most magnificent arms that's ever been in baseball, Effa said. He also was an amazing shortstop. Irvin and power-hitting second baseman Larry Doby were one of the best double-play combinations ever. Then there was Leon Day. He played every place in the field except catcher, Effa said. I don't mean he filled in. He played them. In broiling summer heat, Day would pitch the first game of a doubleheader, then trot out to play outfield for the second. Are any of you baseball fans? Do you like this kind of game? My mom and my brother are big baseball fans, but I've never really been a big sports fan of any kind. But it is kind of fun to hear about something that I'm not very familiar with. When Effa attended league meetings, other owners protested. Baseball's no place for a woman! But over time, they came to respect her because she understood business and she understood baseball. Many owners only wanted to make money from their teams, but Effa cared about hers. She bought the best uniforms and a fancy, comfortable bus. She encouraged players to be active in the community and found them off-season jobs playing ball in Puerto Rico. Her players called her their mother hen. So people were often discriminated against for being African American, but then again, they're discriminated against for being a woman. So here she was African American, she was working in an African American league, and then the owners of the other baseball teams didn't like her because she was a woman. But eventually, she proved them that just because she was female doesn't mean she didn't know what she was doing. The Eagles had talent and skill, but for years they were only second best. There was just no beating the Kansas City Monarchs. In 1946, they got their chance. It all came down to one final Negro League World Series game. The best view was from the press box, but Effa sat in the stands where the seats vibrated from foot-stomping excitement. Newark had a one-run lead going into the final inning. With 2 outs, the Monarchs had 2 men on base. Effa couldn't watch. She heard the crushing thwack of the bat hitting ball and waited one awful second. Was it? Say it wasn't. A home run? The Newark crowd was cheering. Effa peeked through her fingers. The first baseman had made the catch. The Eagles were world champions. It was Effa's proudest moment. You see her here? She's covering her face because she doesn't want to see what happened. The next year, Jackie Robinson, who's a very famous African-American baseball player, joined the Brooklyn Dodgers, the very first black player in the major leagues. So here he is, and he was as I just said, he was the very first player ever to play in the regular baseball league, which it's amazing it took so long. It's amazing they weren't allowed to play together in the first place. So many people, not just baseball fans, were proud and hopeful about change and equality in America. Many black Americans became Dodgers fans that year. Unfortunately, this meant the Negro Leagues lost fans and also started losing their best players without even getting paid for them. Some major league owners didn't know, Negro League players had contracts, others didn't care. When Branch Rickey, general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, signed Don Newcomb in 1945, the Eagles lost an important player and received nothing in return. So when you have a job and you have a contract is like an agreement, and it says basically I'll do something for a certain amount of time. So these baseball players had contracts with their with the leagues of the African American leagues that said they would work for them, and that was important because you can't have a team if you don't have good players. But they broke their contracts and they went to play in these other these other teams, and that was a problem because they lost their best players and they didn't get, no one paid off the rest of the contract for them. Effa was glad to see her players get their big break, but she believed all teams, not just white ones, should be paid for their players. She talked to the press and made people think about how unfair it was. Instead of saying, "That's just the way things are," some began to ask, "But why?" So when Cleveland Indians owner Bill Veeck became interested in Larry Doby, he was ready to negotiate. In July 1947, he paid the Eagles $15,000, and Doby became the first black player in the American League. Effa was losing another great player, but she wished him well. She told him, "Doby, keep hitting the ball out of the park." After that, the Major League team owners always paid Negro League teams for their players. But more and more players left, and soon the Negro League baseball came to an end. On one hand, it's good because then the teams were integrated and mixed, and we were all playing together instead of being separated. On the other hand, it's a little sad that it came to an end because it was a nice community builder. In 1952, Abe became ill and died. Effa lost her best friend, business partner, and truest love all at once. She often looked at her scrapbook to remind her of good times. As she browsed these pages, something kept nagging at her. The history of the Negro Leagues was slipping away. That's the way things are, people said, but it broke Effa's heart. So when he died, she didn't have her job anymore because she'd worked for the Negro League, and then he died, so it was really a difficult time in her life. In the 1970s, she began a letter-writing campaign to convince the National Baseball Hall of Fame to acknowledge the best Negro League players. The Hall had honored some who had also played in the majors, such as Jackie Robinson in 1962, but none who had played their entire career in the Negro Leagues. When the Hall appointed a committee to consider honoring Negro League stars, Effa was thrilled. Between 1971 and 1977, the committee voted to induct 9 Negro League players, including former Eagles star Monty Irvin. Then it announced it had completed its work. Effa was outraged. She could name dozens more who deserved the honor, especially 2 Eagles, slugger Mule Suttles and Biz Mackey, who had managed the 1946 championship team. She continued writing to the Hall until she died in 1981. So, just to make sure you got that. So the players that only played in the Negro League were not being recognized by the Baseball Hall of Fame, even though they were amazing players. And that's why she was writing them constantly, saying, you've got to pay attention to these guys. You've got to induct these guys. You've got to give them the kind of the glory they deserve. The Hall wasn't finished with Negro League players after all. Over the years, more Effa's favorites were inducted, but many, including Suttles and Mackey, were not. It wasn't right. It was just the way things were until 2006. On July 30th, Suttles and Mackey and 10 other Negro League players were finally inducted into the Hall of Fame. Effa would have been proud. So the league ended in the 40s, and it took until 2006 for them to finally recognize these players for their value and their great ball-playing skills. And sadly, Effa Manley was already dead, so she didn't even know about it. And she spent the last of her life working so hard to make sure these guys were recognized, and then it happened after she died, so she didn't even know about it. Something else happened that day, something amazing. Effa was inducted along with them. In baseball's long history, Effa Manley was the first woman ever to be so honored. She was recognized for all she did for the players, for her civil rights work, and for getting the major leagues to treat Negro League teams with respect. On Effa's gravestone it says, she loved baseball. In 2006, baseball proved it loved her back. Again, that's really cool. So she's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but sadly, she doesn't know about it. She died in 1981, and they inducted her in 2006. It's still a great honor, but it would have been really nice if she'd known about it, because it would have made her feel really good to see that people honored her and all her work. So here's a picture of the plaque. I thought that was interesting because, again, I said I'm not a baseball fan. I don't really know much about baseball, and I didn't know about Effa Manley until I saw this book, and it's really interesting that she worked so hard to make sure that people were treated fairly in different arenas in her life, both in her home, the city where she lived in Harlem, and in the baseball team. So anyway, I hope you liked learning about somebody new. Tell me if you're a baseball fan. All right, friends, happy reading.